Welcome, everyone, to the third part from isolation to conversation. This session will be about making meaning, which we all want to do. I'm Sharon Morris from the Colorado State Library, joined here by my colleague, Kieran Hickson, and we are hosting this session today. So I'd like to introduce our speakers today, all from Colorado Libraries. Nancy Barnes, formerly of the Bemis Public Library in Littleton, now the Director of Branches at Garfield County Public Libraries. Jamie LaRue, the Director of the Garfield County Public Library District in Rifle, and Brenda Marshall from the Pine River Library District. She's the Director there in Bayfield.
Okay, well, I'll just jump in here if I may. Thank you, Sharon, and wonderful to be back with everybody here. Appreciate you sticking with us through the first two. Our story to date, we began by looking at the overall process. And again, I won't go through this too much unless anybody has any questions about it, but came up with a list of people we felt we should talk to. We interviewed them in their space. We documented, analyzed for themes. That's kind of what we're focusing on today. We debriefed the movers and shakers at a public meeting held at the library or virtually. Pick a project or initiatives, recommend them to a board, do them, and tell everybody about them. So last time we kind of left you with, we used that previously brainstormed list of movers and shakers and said, go out and book the interviews, conduct as many of them as you can, and record. And I'm just curious at this moment, if anybody would like to type this into chat, and Sharon and Kieran, I'll ask you kind of keep an eye on this. But I mentioned in previous meetings that at the beginning, sometimes staff were a little reluctant to go off and do this, but they all came back with extraordinary enthusiasm. And I would just be interested in any comments that you might put in the chat about how your staff responded to doing the interviews and recording them. So while we're letting you do that, again, this time we're kind of focusing on analyzing, making meaning of the data that we received. That has several sub-steps that we'll get to. Build a community presentation of what we've learned, the things that they told us, finding out if we got it right. Revise those findings based on the feedback. Develop 3 to 5 initiatives that really focus on moving the community forward. And remember those last 3 things that are easy to forget. Budget for the things we think we need to do, actually do them, and a reminder to tell everybody that we said we were going to, and we did. Okay, so the questions that we asked for the community again were these kind of 5. How'd you get here? Meaning, what's your personal story? What are you passionate about? What are the issues that you think the community is grappling with? What are your aspirations for the community, and who else should we talk to? And so let me kind of talk a little bit about this next step of analysis. We went through last time, we built a form that populates a Google spreadsheet. And what that does is it places all of the answers that you've received in a couple of columns. The column that we're mainly interested in, the one is tell me about the issues that you think your constituents are concerned about. What I always do with this process is once all that the spreadsheet is done, I go back and I format all cells to put everything in the upper left and to wrap so that you can read the column as you read down. Then you copy the whole column, paste all of that data into a simple text editor. And by that I mean it would be like Notepad on Windows, text edit on the Mac, and that strips all the column markers. And now you just have a column of plain text. Copy and paste it again into a word processor. That restores the word wrap, and it lets you kind of go through to highlight and kind of underscore the key terms that you see every time you go through it. Some people choose to say this is a very small team and we just have 1 or 2 people that are going through to make these kind of highlighted terms. Some people open up to the whole branch. I think whatever works for you is fine. But the point is, this is an iterative process. When you're doing qualitative analysis, meaning when people give you not just numbers, but words, and you're trying to make sense of them, you read through, you highlight, you repeat that, you do it a bunch of times, and then you talk about it with the people around you to begin to make sense of it. It just takes a lot of iteration. So an example of what I mean is, again, that column was, as you think about your constituents, what are the issues? I copied all these things, pasted it in, and my first time through, I went, boy, this one really jumps out at me. Affordable housing. So you underline it, you're going through that second column, there's affordable housing again. Move down a little bit, there's housing, and then wages are surely connected to affordable housing. So that's like a first pass. Then you go back the second time and you say, okay, well, what else am I seeing here that shows up repeated multiple times. You're not just underscoring everything that shows up one time. This is the process of beginning to discern patterns. And as I'll try to do when I go through each of these slides with our fellow panelists here, Brenda, any comments about just what this process was like with you?
I have to say, initially it seemed like it was going to be overwhelming because we had so much data. But once we started playing with it in a few different ways, it really wasn't that difficult. It came pretty clear, and we did have so many repeating themes. So yeah, we used some of the tools that you're going to show, and really wasn't too bad at all.
Can I just jump in here for a second, because I love this data set and it kind of illustrates the fun of having more than one color of highlighter. So, with this circumstance with Bayfield, Brenda may have chosen housing as like the yellow highlighter. And then there's something about economic growth and stuff, and that might be the green highlighter. And then there's sort of the whole changing character of Bayfield, new people moving in, and that might be blue. And so that is kind of a quick way, if you have a lot of pages, to get different colors and start to see patterns and that sort of thing.
Okay, and Nancy, how about you? Did you have any particular insights into this process of mining the data for common terms?
Yeah, I was going to say, we did a very similar process highlighting the common themes that we saw. To sort of segue off of what Sharon was just saying, the one thing that we did do was in a different color highlight what we considered to be sort of anomalies or out of the ordinary responses, ones that weren't common, so that we could at least collect them and then kind of set them aside and come back to them later and say, do we need to investigate this further? Is there something here, or is it just sort of a one-off comment or feedback from someone? So that was also really helpful too, just to be able to identify those things that may be unusual that you heard.
So then I want to mention that I want to talk a little bit about some other tools that can help you begin to find some patterns in the responses. And again, highlighting is one way, and that's kind of depending upon your own mind. But I asked Brenda to talk a little bit about this, because this is Brenda using the whiteboard to make sense of things. Brenda, can you talk us about that?
Sure, super high tech whiteboard. So we had given we did those first steps, printed everything out, or distributed it with staff, and then asked them to come back to a meeting and help us sort of collate. And the whiteboard on the left is us sort of hearing the things that were thrown out and then starting to group them into a variety of areas. And it was was a helpful way. I kind of think in that scattered way. So I like a whiteboard, really is like my favorite tool, really. And then you can see on the second whiteboard, which was on the right, which is where we started to take some of the things that we were hearing and started to kind of coordinate them and to begin to think about our responses and what sort of themes were really coming up and what our ideas might be. So just another way to get all that information out there and start to pull it into groups.
Yeah. And let me take the next one here. And so this was your second method.
Mm-hmm. One of our staff members actually was playing with, she took the information that we'd shared and she put it into a software program that, or some kind of tool that created this lovely word map for us. And it was really a cool way. Again, I know you can't see the colors very clearly on this image, but it was a cool way for us to look again and then have, we just had this massive data, and then she was pulling out repeated words. And when you look at it carefully, like I think if you're going to use a tool like this, some of the words are different words that kind of mean the same thing. So you might want to do more editing, but just in that kind of like that part of the process where we just wanted to think outside the box and have our minds open and receptive to everything that we'd been given. It was a great way to see it all. And I see Janet's question there about how many interviews. We actually did 70 over the course of the whole year.
Okay, that's great. And again, I think one of the big issues, whether you use the whiteboard or the word cloud, there are two components of that. First, it's visual. It's some way for people to begin to process information outside of a narrative structure. And then the second issue is that you are involving other people. And so just that process of discussion is what kind of makes it clear. And then what happened was, and I was working with Brenda in some of this, and I often use mind maps. And so we got so excited about doing this first, we thought, oh, should we do a little demo of what this is like? But if you'd like, you can download this from the URL there at the top there. This is a free mind mapping program. It works on Windows, it works on Mac, it works on Linux, and many advantages. It's free, it's visual, very, very easy to add the same sort of topics that you saw on the whiteboard. And if you kind of look down there under social issues, you can see that under each of these headings, you can put a bunch of other things. So the social issues that came up was like, we feel like we need such a sense of purpose. There's a rise of concern of suicide, general mental health issues. We see drugs and addiction, some accessibility issues, LGBTQ and race. And so this program allows you to expand or contract things under each of these categories, which makes it very easy to drag things around and recategorize and again, get that visual sense. Everything on the right, at this point, we're saying these are all of the many issues you talked about. And on the left, we're trying to start to group those in a way that we think will make some sense to us. But Brenda, what else would you like to say about just kind of this process of the first pass of getting ready to talk to the community?
I really did love this program. I feel kind of evangelical about it. Thank you, Jamie, for introducing me to it. But what you kind of can't see on a static image of it is that each nodule that you click on can open up into another nodule, and you can keep adding nodules. So it was a fantastic way. I used it to explain to other people and show other people what we'd done and what all the information, and it just is very flexible and usable. So this was a really good tool, I thought, and something I'm going to use in the future. So if people do have individual questions, I'm really happy for you to email me or whatever, and I can help you. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory once you start playing with it, but happy to share a more interactive version with you if you're interested.
And when we got to doing this, did you actually present to your community using the mind map?
I did. So we used this for our first feedback to the community, which is where, I know you're not at this portion yet, but where you kind of tell them where we are so far, what did we miss, what do you want to add? When we had that community meeting, I used this. And the great thing about it was, it's not a polished, finished product. It's still a working document. And so they had me edit sections, reword sections. Some people didn't like certain pieces, and we or wanted to add more or explain more. So it was a great tool to be able to, it was a visual aid to get a lot of information over relatively succinctly.
Okay. And then when we got to Bemis, same kind of thing, but with them, it seemed like there were fewer themes. So in some ways, it was a little easier to track. So Nancy, what was your take on the mind map for this one?
Yeah, it was also incredibly helpful for us. We came up with 6 major themes, and 4 of those were really places where the library could intersect with the community concerns. I think also what was helpful with the mind map is that while we had the 6 major categories, drilling down into the subcategories really helped drive some of the strategic initiatives that we eventually developed. So I think that if you're looking at this process also as a way to develop a long-range plan, your strategic initiatives very well may be found within some of these subcategories.
Okay, great. So now that you've done your kind of first pass for this, and again, you can see that kind of as Brenda explained it, things can get large first, you keep adding things, but then you use this mind map and use various tools to begin to condense and to clarify some of the underlying structure. Then the idea is you reach out to all of the people that you interviewed and you say, now we want to tell you all the things you told us. You invite your board to this. Again, we've talked in the past about whether or not the board should be involved in conducting the interviews. I generally think not, but either way, I do think that the board should show up for this debrief. I believe also very important to invite the press, just as I felt that it was important to interview some of the press. getting the press to come to this meeting, A, gives you some visibility. B, often gives the press this kind of, well, here's my editorial agenda for the year. These are the things that the community is talking about. It can inform our coverage of the news. I also invite senior staff. If you have people that were involved in doing some of the interviews or will be responsible for some of these initiatives, smart to have them in the room just listening. Then you walk through the results. Typically in a mind map, I tend to go clockwise, but some people go, down one side, then down the other. And then you say, is this right? Anything we got wrong that we need to revise? Anything we need to change or add to? And then sometimes, and I don't know if either of you got into this, and I'll ask you in a second, but you might also say, who is working on this right now? Because one of the things that I found in communities ranging from 300 to 300,000, it is always the case that there are at least two people working on every single one of those agenda items, and often they didn't know that the other one was working on it. And so it begins to get a way not only to connect the community, but to tell you where there are gaps and where nobody is working on it. And that might be a way for the library to step in. Nancy, any comments about the debrief process from your perspective?
For us, it was a little different because we were still sort of in the pandemic phase. And so ours was held virtually. But nonetheless, I was happy that we had at least a dozen people attend. And they did confirm that we had gotten it right, that we had accurately represented the interviews and what we learned. I will say the one thing that they really sort of latched onto was the need for, the awareness that teens in particular, teens and seniors were struggling with issues of isolation and mental health issues, and that was of concern to the group. And they were very receptive to ways that the library could help provide some sort of support around those issues, or be a place where those issues were discussed and people were gathered again once it was safe to do so.
Okay. And Brenda, how about you? Did you notice any particular reactions from the people as they heard these agenda items?
Yeah, one thing that was really interesting to me was that one of the town board members came, who we'd interviewed, and then she came to this piece of the debrief, and she was talking about, after I'd finished sharing, she was talking about how all the issues we identified really overlapped with what the town of Bayfield were trying to do. And so I think for her, it was validating. That it helped them feel that they were kind of on the right track. And then that sort of started a conversation between our agencies and theirs about how we're working. And then actually I just was at our Friends of the Library meeting, and I saw that town board member was at the Friends of the Library meeting. And so I think, and I visited with her about sharing information back and forth. So it was really useful. And I mean, it's a similar thing that we've heard. It's validating with external agencies, I think. When you said that piece about who's already working on this, we were able, some of the people that came to that meeting were like, us finding this information was saying, it was us being able to say, look how important it is that you're doing that, and look how needed that is. And so, yeah, I like how these things sort of interweave.
And I'll say that, Nancy, I know that we, because we were doing this one on Zoom, we had the ability to record it. I don't know as anybody ever comes back and asks for the recording, but it's not a bad way to just even preserve your own history. We had a conversation with the community. Here's what we found. Here's who was there. It's a nice, succinct package.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Jamie, because actually I ended up sending that recording to two people who specifically had reached out to me with their regrets about not being able to attend, but did ask for a recording. So, I was really pleasantly surprised that they wanted to still participate in that way and review what had been discussed.
And again, I think that not only it can be more than a one-off. And I think, Brenda, you had said that one of the things that happened after you did this presentation, suddenly you become an expert on the issues of the community, and other people can you present that to us? Okay, so then now you've presented everything back, you've gotten some tweaks from it, and then you begin this process of saying, okay, how do we turn that into long-range planning initiatives? And it may be that you have other things that are already in your long-range plan that you were going to do anyhow. You know that you need a new building, for instance. But now it might be that you've heard from the community that there is such a profound thirst for gathering. I know that's one of the things that I saw, certainly from Bemis, certainly from many of the other places we talked to. One of the other ones that I remember is that I think one of the early comments here in the chat was about many people in this process would talk about their sorrow, sometimes despair, about the political conflict within a community. And so one of the things that they look to the library is like, well, nobody's mad at you yet. Maybe we can figure out a way to meet with you. And you can say, well, now that library space is not just because we think we need more space. The community has told us it needs a place to gather. And so it's a way to reframe the way we talk about our own business in ways that resonate better with our community. When you think about staff initiatives, I think about it in three ways. One of them is it in the library's wheelhouse? Is this something that you think you can do? Can we be good at it? Are you pretty sure that when you step into this, that, yeah, we have the skills to pull it off? And then the big one about this one is to say, will it move the community forward? Nancy, I know this is kind of a bit of a stretch, but you were saying that as you were going through this, getting some of these categories, you were already thinking about where's the overlap with the library. And so any thoughts about how you whittle things down to say, this looks like a good library project?
Well, a lot of it was that question about, is this in the library's wheelhouse, and looking for that intersection of where we could be of value. And since we were a city library too, it also helped to look to see if some of the initiatives that we could push forward were also in alignment with city council goals, for instance. Since those goals had been thoroughly vetted and came from constituents. So those were ways that we were able to kind of match up what we were hearing from the community and what we believed we could do to make progress.
Okay. And Brenda, any thoughts about this, or next time showing kind of what you came up with?
Yeah, I think what was interesting was a lot of what you hear is not, like, for example, you saw on our earlier thing, affordable housing. We would love to be able to wave a wand or prevent suicide. These things were things we would love to be able to do. And so, however, it's such valuable information, and they're such important topics. So some of the things we heard a lot, and then some of those bigger issues are actually going to color everything we do, I think. Our awareness of everything in lots of areas. And our issue wasn't finding initiatives. Actually, it was like narrowing down into, and we did use this rubric. This was a great rubric, I think, to use. And it was a good process. And we did take on the big issues, the big difficult issues that we heard about, but they've really become part of our staff's thinking now, I think.
Okay, well, Brenda, since we got you up here,
Okay.
this is the Mind Map 2.0. And so this is sort of, and you can tell that it's much improved over my version, because on the right-hand side, it is now alphabetized. I always appreciate that thoughtfulness on the part of librarians. Brenda, can you just walk through what does this Mind Map represent in that process of getting to library initiatives?
Yeah, so this one is our sort of tidied up version, and we tried to narrow down our themes a little bit. And this is the one that I'm using now as I go out in the community and I'm sharing what we did and where we ended up with. And so on the right-hand side of the screen here are some of the issues that came up, and I can go into more detail as I explain it to people about which piece, what they look like using those, if I expand any of those nodules. And then we use that information actually to redo our mission and vision and goals, because we wanted to make sure that those things were appropriate as well. And we had so much community and staff discussion. It just was a very natural evolution to start bringing those things out. And then our initiatives, we tried to pick things that were relatively that were exactly as Jamie said, in the library wheelhouse, things we felt confident that we could do well, and things that would impact the community. So I think we achieved that. But I have to say, we've got a very big list of other things we want to do that are also in line with all the things that we heard. And so that was part of it, the difficult part of the process for me, whereas I was just like, well, this is important, and this is important, and this is important. And so I like that other thing that you have built into this sort of plan, is that we just pick a few things. And I have to keep reminding myself, we don't need to do everything all at once. We need to do some things well. And then when we've got them rolling, maybe we can move to the next thing and the next thing.
Well, that's right. I think that, again, underlying all this is the notion we're not just coming up with a list of 25 things that we can do it and do pretty well, which I think we could do at any staff meeting. It's like, what did we do that actually makes a difference in the community and demonstrates our value to the community? And I'll come back to this idea about goals and mission, Nancy, later. So, Brenda, talk us through how you went from this to that.
Great. So one of the things that we heard all the time was we recently lost our local newspaper in the last couple of years. I don't think that's probably unique. I imagine that's happening all over the place. So we kept hearing from people, how am I supposed to know what's going on? Or in our interviews with people, we were finding people, isolation was a theme that came up, or the desire to do more things, have things to do, or connect with other people. And one thing we realized was there were things going on, like workout classes or opportunities for toddlers or seniors, but people didn't know or don't know what's happening, and it relies on either Facebook or word of mouth. And so where does that leave people who don't use Facebook or who don't know a lot of people? So we decided to create a community-wide calendar that covers our whole district, and we're hosting it, asking people to populate it. We're using a Google form, so there's kind of details in here that the public don't necessarily need to know, but this is our in-house one. We're going to build, maintain, and update the calendar, and then we're also offering the opportunity for paper printouts for people that come in the library that don't have access to technology or don't want to have access. So it's a Google calendar, but we're willing to print it. And it hit all the 4 goals that we established with this connect, thrive, inspire, and enrich, which I think they're great library words, aren't they? I think probably every library has these words in their vocabulary all the time. But these were some goals that came out and helping us structure our thinking. And then we had another few. I don't want to take over, but we did have another few initiatives, but this was the first one.
Okay. And then again, Bemis, here was your big mind map, and then you had whittled it down to some initiatives there. So Nancy, want to tell us how you did that and what you were trying to accomplish?
Sure. So from the themes that emerged in the mind map and the subcategories, we came up with 5 main areas of focus. And so these are examples of 2. One was building strong community partnerships. And like Brenda, a major concern that we heard was isolation, both of teens and seniors, largely due to the results of the pandemic. And so we decided to work on volunteer recruitment, both for ourselves and for some community organizations. And we also have an immigrant resource center at the library, which relies heavily on volunteers. So, we launched a volunteer recruitment plan, utilized social media to get people excited about volunteer opportunities and that opportunity to once again gather and connect. We committed to quarterly volunteer training workshops. So this both helped volunteers know what was expected of them, but also gave them an opportunity to network with other people and be engaged with the programs or services that they were going to help support. And then we also committed to 2 appreciation events annually. And so that was one of the main initiatives under our Strong Community Partnerships goal. Another goal was inclusive access. And one of the things that we heard was not just that it was, for some people there were physical limitations to getting to the library. We had a large senior population in Littleton, but also quite a bit of transportation problems in certain areas of the city getting to the library. And our library bookmobile project was born directly out of the results of our community conversations process. We received a grant for half of the cost of the bookmobile. We got city administration and city council to add this as a goal. And service delivery is actually launching right now. The bookmobile is on its way a year and a half later. But this was definitely born out of this process and what we learned about how much of a struggle it was for certain segments of our population to get to the library, to get materials, to be able to enjoy story time.
And before I leave this slide, I wanted to kind of go back here and say, Brenda went back and used this opportunity to look at mission and vision. And how did that, what did Littleton do around those issues?
Yeah, we did as well. We rewrote our mission statement and our vision statement. In particular, when we undertook this process, we had our funding and our staffing cut by 30%. During this time, our Immigrant Resource Center was temporarily defunded. So we had a lot of reasons to be concerned about our future and the viability of the library in the community. And so we redefined ourselves as an essential community asset. That was really something that we were hearing from our supporters, is that we were a cultural institution that was highly valued. And so we really wanted to place ourselves in that narrative that we were essential. And thankfully we were able to get our funding and staffing restored. And I'll talk about this a little later. Some of the people that we met along the way that were instrumental in helping us do that. But it was really important to us to really reestablish ourselves as that essential anchor institution in our community.
Okay. So what happens after you put all this stuff together to say, okay, we have put together our wonderful initiatives that we think not only helped us redefine us in our own minds, but in the minds of our community, a way to demonstrate the values. What do you have to do then? Then I think, again, falls back on the staff to say, okay, what does it cost us to do a community calendar? What does it cost us to do a bookmobile? Identify those budget needs and then take them back to the board and say, based on all of these conversations with the community, here's what we know we need to do. We think these initiatives are on point. Please approve this so that we're focusing on a few big things that are actually going to make a difference in our community. Next step is adopting a budget is a promise to the community. And so then you have to keep your promises to the community. So you actually have to do it. And then one of the things I feel like I always want to weave into anytime we talk to libraries about how do we communicate to our communities. Remember, the message is not just we have this wonderful service, come and use it. What Nancy was just saying was that we are deeply valued already as cultural institutions that represent social assets. And it's not enough just to underscore the services. We also have to continue to underscore the value proposition, why what we do actually means something. So it's time to walk the walk. So kind of going back here to Nancy. So now you've done all this work, you put everything together, you got the budget, you had a funding crisis there. How did this play into your solution, Nancy?
Well, two of the movers and shakers that we interviewed during the community interview process ended up running for and winning seats on city council. And so we had already established relationships with these people. One of them was a social worker in the community, and the other was an urban planner. And these relationships that we built really proved invaluable when we were able to advocate for new council members to reverse the previous council's decisions that defunded our Immigrant Resource Center. Having those two people in our corner and their ability to help us advocate was crucial. And then they were also, on the council that reconsidered our funding and staffing cuts. So again, I think that these interviews are a great opportunity to develop a strong core network of supporters and to foster these relationships that can be ongoing, hopefully for years to come, and prove invaluable, not just to the library, but for you to be invaluable to their organizations in the future as well.
Okay, that's great. And Brenda, how about you? What did you learn through all this process?
Well, I completely agree with what Nancy's saying about the relationship building and being centered in other organizations in our community, or, kind of like putting your face in those places where we're not used to being, and bringing the library to those places is really been great. And I've had some unusual connections. I just was recently at an event where I bumped into the local Catholic priest who I never would have met if I hadn't have interviewed him. And we are talking about using this local church as a venue for a classical music concert, that we would do. I don't know if this is going to happen, but these are things that, really cool things that I would never have had an occasion probably to bump into him specifically, so that was awesome. But we have used our information. We're in the middle of changing our logo and our brand to better reflect ourselves. We just, as a center of the community and not such a book-centric kind of logo and brand, and that we're using it to refresh that and our mission and our vision, as I said earlier. And then the other piece where I'm really seeing it play out is in with our staff perspective and our planning as a library, and then also as individual staff. So we spent a staff day together, and then I'm meeting with each staff member individually, and we don't have a very big staff, so it's a bit more achievable. But and I'm asking them to look at the document that we put together and to write their own strategic planning goals with this in mind. And I'm encouraging them to actually use this same rubric that we used earlier. What's in your wheelhouse is your job, your role. What can you do well, and what will be the most benefit to the community and the library? And it's almost acting like a compass for us. So when we're in a decision, like should we do A or B, the things that have got more value or that are more topical right now, more relevant right now, are the things we're choosing. And I'm just finding that in my day-to-day planning, anything that is triggering, for example, this morning I just RSVP'd to a suicide prevention program that's being held one town over. And it's difficult for me to get to. I have a shift that day, whatever, but I'm going to restructure my schedule to go to that because it's top of mind in what we heard and what we want to work towards. So I think really it's such great information that we're hearing. It would be a shame if it just was then put in a box and put away. Mm-hmm. It's only really going to mean anything if we do something tangible with it, and whether that's on a personal level or an institutional level or a community level is kind of our next challenge. I think really, I don't want this to become a dusty document that is just filed away. I want it to be what we're living and breathing on the floor. And I personally want it to guide my movements. And I think it adds value. I've been able to look at people in the library also and point out, look what a great job you did bringing that group of moms together and, connecting people, or look how these seniors came to this, really enjoyed that craft workshop or what have you, and your speak. And so it's a good way to sort of motivate ourselves and inspire staff that we're on the right track.
But to try to tie this together to the larger theme, we began by talking about isolation. and recognize that for many of us, when we launched these processes, it was in the middle of a pandemic. And that's about as isolated as anybody has been in America since the frontier days. There was a lot of loneliness and a lot of anxiety. But we found that just by reaching out to people, by beginning these kind of conversations, there was a bit of a rebirth of a connection to a larger social fabric. In some respect, all of us are isolated within our own brains, our own bodies, and all of us yearn to be part of something that's a little bit larger. And having the library step in to say, we're going to honor your concerns and try to figure out a way that we can bridge that individual being locked away in your house to being part of some larger social fabric really demonstrates value, really demonstrates meaning, and I think ultimately is the whole purpose of this.
Yeah, so maybe just going back to that last slide, because I think Janet really raises another issue that's a different theme, but a really pervasive theme in our culture right now, which is in the few interviews she and her co-director have done in the Westcliff area, what they've found is a concern that about the divisiveness in their community, different people with different political or other really different ways of thinking about things. And her interest, like, can the library serve as a community peacemaker in a way?
Okay, I'll nod to my co-panelists here first, because I know that this issue about conflict came up in both of your communications. And I noticed that one of the ways that all the people in both Pine River and Bemis talked about this was we need to know what's going on. We needed greater communication of some kind. So either Brenda or Nancy, how would you address that issue about bridging the divide between a partisan conflict?
Division and separation came up for us left and right, whether it was political, geographical, racial, age, it came up a lot. And I absolutely do think one of the wonderful things about libraries is that we are open to everybody, and we are more relatively neutral spaces. So yeah, we did discuss that. We've done some community conversations before, and so from a program, we didn't make it an initiative, but we are hoping. I've got a staff member starting a training about that. We're hoping to get back into that field. And also, I have to say, I think every time we do a program, I don't know about fly fishing or crafting or wherever it is, we provide a space where people of any political or racial or whatever background can be and come together and have a focus. And I sometimes think those opportunities, talking about watercolors or whatever, might be that's the place where we can get together and engage as neighbors without our politics and everything else being in the way. That might sound like a cop-out, but to me, getting to talk to our neighbors is the problem. And the fact that we've been so removed and we only engage, or some of us have only engaged on Twitter and Facebook, is the problem. And if we can just bring people together with a neutral topic, sometimes, we don't necessarily have to be talking about the difficult thing. Sometimes we should be, but sometimes talking about something completely different is where we're actually going to make friends and get past some of these things. Yeah, Nancy?
Yeah, I think Brenda, really nailed it. I mean, for me, I think a lot of the ways that we can help be peacemakers is simply by the programs that we offer, is being that space that welcomes all people, that invites all people to participate. One of our main goals was impactful programming, and we looked at that a couple different ways. One was in addressing the cultural diversity in our community that I don't think our programming did very well before that, and being very intentional about that. Whether it was diversity with ethnicity or diversity in ability. And the other thing that we've seen is that, we are still a trusted and respected institution, and people do feel like when they attend a library program, it is a space where they're going to feel comfortable coming as they are. One of our most popular programs is a weekly senior social group that they talk about issues of the day. They don't shy away from political issues or other issues, and they have a group of diverse thinkers there, but they keep coming back. I mean, we have anywhere from 15 to 21 people that show up over and over week after week to solve the world's problems. And but it's fantastic because they they keep coming back, even though sometimes they get pretty lively. But I think that's we're facilitating it. We are sort of keeping them on track, but it's their group to engage with, and it's they take ownership of how they welcome and treat one another. So we're pretty proud of that one.
I think I'd build off of both of those to think, something about this whole process is about acknowledging the wisdom in your community. And so if you begin with this notion that we're already saying, we're not the ones that are just telling you how everything is in the world, we're asking you how things are. And libraries that are not just places where we have lots and lots of programs, but we actually see the people who come into the library as the solution to many of these issues, that they too are assets for each other, that we help each other. And I'm jumping over to a couple other questions over here I want to make sure we got to. Anna, you had asked about, do you include staff time and capacity in the budget for the identified priorities? And absolutely. I think one of the issues is that if you sit down to say, we have been spending a whole lot of time on some of these issues that don't seem to have much of a constituency, and there's a huge demand for this one. And if we're going to gear up to that, we're going to need more staff. Maybe the ask in the budget is for a dedicated community relations person. I think that's perfectly acceptable. But I think the point here is not so much necessarily that you have to ask for a brand new budget in a different direction, as much as it is a way to take the opportunity to refocus your budget. Often when I'm looking at many of these things, they're not big ticket items. It's more a refocusing of staff.
No, I agree. I mean, one of the things that we talked about a lot was realigning staff priorities and realigning staff capacity to meet the initiatives that were born out of this process. And, it's okay to look at the sacred cows that you have and say, is this still worth the time and investment of people, of resources that we're putting into it? Or has something else risen to the surface that we really need to prioritize? And I think this is a good time to do that, is once you finish this process and you look at all the data you've collected and what the community wants from you and needs from you.
Yeah, to underscore that, it's like the difference between when you look at a program, you say, who is the constituency for the program? And often in the case of the library, we're the constituents. And it's kind of interesting to flip that around and say, but who does it serve outside of these walls?
Yeah, we absolutely took that into account, staff time, and when we were thinking about budgeting. And also, I was aware of not biting off more than we could chew. I was like, I kind of was getting really excited. And like I say, I kind of had like more things I wanted to do. And, even as we're talking now, I'm still thinking, well, that's a great idea. We could do that, which is kind of like my default. But actually, we needed to kind of rein in and be like, what can we actually do? And I completely agree with that idea about the sacred cows. Like sometimes we're in a different community now. Things are moving ahead. And I like that idea of being open and flexible and responsive, rather than just being, we always do it this way. And it's amazing how quickly we become institutionalized and locked into those things. And it's definitely important to think about the impact, the cost, budget-wise, financially, and time-wise. And I feel like in our situation, we're only just starting to implement our initiatives. and we're navigating through that. Like some things are taking a lot more time and are easier or harder than we expected. And so same way as when you write a regular budget, some stuff, it's hard to estimate. But yeah, definitely got that in mind.
I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to work at an Abby Hoffman quote, which is that sacred cows make the best hamburger. And then I see there's a question here from Lydia about, no, we're supposed to leave library specific questions out of our interviews to make things more community centered, but did you find that people really just wanted to talk about their specific organization? Yes, we did. And if so, did you just listen or try to steer those questions back to the bigger community as a whole? My answer first, and you folks may have others. The reason, you want them to talk about their organization. That's why you're reaching out to them. When you find a group that's like they're dealing deeply with homelessness, they are your community expert. They are the local authority. You want to learn as much as you possibly can about that issue. The separate issue is when they want to talk about the library. And we talked about that last time. We say, okay, thank you very much, but that's kind of not what we're about. Appreciate hearing it, and then try to steer it back to talking more about their experiences. But Brenda, Nancy, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue for us was just steering people back to talking about community issues rather than the library itself, especially if they were fairly knowledgeable about the library. I think when you're speaking with someone who is heavily involved with a specific organization, that's also a good time to really listen for ways where you can intersect with that organization and be true partners, and if that is available. So I think that's just a good time to really listen, and look for those areas where your purposes intersect, where your time and talents intersect in ways that you can strengthen each other.
Yeah, I felt I learned a lot about different, a lot of the time, even if they didn't answer my question, if I just kept quiet, that was my challenge, was to not be the one talking. So I was like, I kept just trying to listen and hear what they were saying, and I learned a lot. And then sometimes I asked the same question 3 times before I started getting to it. So I'd hear and take notes, and like Nancy said, often it was people wanted to tell me things about the library, or they had an agenda or an issue that they wanted to share. And, I want to hear that. I do want to hear that. So I would listen to that. But then I would come back and say, when we look at our big community, what are you feeling? Or how are your friends and neighbors hoping for? What are they hoping for? What have you? So I would just redirect. But I did listen to lots of stuff that was maybe not the answers to my question, but I benefited from that, honestly.
Okay, and I wanted to grab this last question here. We have an extremely right-wing newspaper, as well as the long-standing local paper, which is self-confessed as not doing journalism, but to influence policy. That said, they're really angry, nasty people. I've heard a couple of different opinions about whether we should interview them or not, be Switzerland, neutral, or work around them. There are plenty of people who share that viewpoint, their viewpoint, but might be less antagonistic to interview. Thoughts from the group. So do you deal with the nasty rabble-rousers who have a platform? Do you avoid them, or do you try to bring them into the group?
That's a tough one. I think I can imagine. Sorry, I would be definitely nervous, but I absolutely think I'd rather hear what they had to say face to face and start to establish a relationship. You don't have to actually act on anything, necessarily, if it doesn't align with your library's values. It's scary. I did reach out to one person who was very angry with us, who was an individual, not a powerful group like a newspaper. So there's different levels of bravery here, and I don't know how brave I would be in your situation, I have to say. But the one person I reached out to who was very unhappy with us due to our response to the pandemic and some different things that happened, I ended up having a really good visit with and treated it as a relationship building, a relationship repair. kind of experience, and it went very well. But yeah, these are tough times, and you know, my feeling about how I would want to behave and what I would like to do is one thing. If I were actually in your shoes, I don't, you know, I understand if that's something you don't want to do, but yeah, kind of better the devil you know, in my opinion.
Mhm. Yeah, I think my only other thought would be that if I was able to identify anything that I might have in common with that one of the people in the group, whether it's we maybe, you know, or have an interest in the same thing, or, you know, somebody's spouse or child, that might be who I would choose, just because I could share whatever that morsel of commonality is, and start from that place. But like, yeah, like Brenda said, I think I would steal up all my courage and try and choose the person I felt was perhaps most amenable.
From my perspective, I think, you know, conversation is the whole point. The reason people are angry and nasty, particularly when they attack other people, is because they don't know very much about them. And so one of the things that we're trying to accomplish in this process is to say, when somebody says, you know, you only talk to people who agree with you, say, no, we talk to you. You didn't agree to us, but you are a minority whose opinions have been listened to and talked about, but we have chosen to respond to more people. We put up all of our email addresses, including Nancy's new email address, major win for Garfield County Libraries there. And so I guess I'll hand it back to you, Sharon, to wrap up however you feel we need to.
Well, thank you so much to Jamie, Nancy, and Brenda for such a compelling story of what you've done and how you've used this process to make some pretty important changes to your library and for your community, including building relationships and you know, getting funding back and really shifting staff and budget to things that are really going to meet the needs of your community. I think that what's nice about this process and why we really wanted to feature it and why we really appreciate all of your examples is that it's a pretty doable thing for a small library, for larger systems, to use a pretty simple method, go and talk to a lot of people. And it seems like it's been transformative in so many of these cases. And look forward to you reaching out as you have questions to any of us. Yeah.